The Platinum Trophy for Crypt of the NecroDancer currently sits at a completion rate of 0.07%, making it legitimately one of the rarest trophies to ever exist. While nearly 29,000 people have downloaded and played the game, there are only 19 known people who managed to get every achievement out of the way and have earned the Platinum Trophy. And with the average completion for the title sitting at 4%, it is pretty safe to assume that these numbers won't drastically change anytime soon. Despite the fact that we only know of 19 people who managed to fully complete the game, I was lucky enough to talk to 2 of them, and here is what they had to say about their experiences with Crypt of the NecroDancer.
It got to a point where it actually started affecting me mentally in real life.
I genuinely cried when I got it.
Both SlimSanta and Wizolo are seasoned trophy hunters who have definitely earned their stripes, and have knocked out multiple extremely rare titles with platinum trophies that sit well below the 1% completion rate, which makes it all the more concerning that Crypt of the NecroDancer gave them such a hard time. But what exactly is it that makes this innocent looking indie game so hard, so unforgiving and so stressful that even our 2 veterans got pushed to their absolute limit? To answer these questions, we will have to start from the very beginning, and we'll split the monumental effort to get the platinum trophy for Crypt of the NecroDancer into 3 different layers. First off, let's have a look at what is still within the realm of possibilities. Trophies that your everyday Joe, people like you and me, could probably pull off if they showed enough effort. Then, we will have a look at the middle layer, where we will take a look at trophies that are already extremely rare and analyze what exactly it is that they require you to do. And finally, we'll look at the very bottom of the iceberg and the craziest achievements this title has to offer. The type of trophies that are reserved for only the best of the best, a handful of people like Santa and Wizolo, who have both invested hundreds of hours into the game and have proven that they have what it takes to earn the Platinum Trophy. Before we get started though, let me just say that while looking into this topic, I noticed that the completion rate for basically every trophy of Crypt of the NecroDancer is, for some reason, astronomically higher on PlayStation Network than it is on websites like PSN Profiles, which really just doesn't make any sense at all. And even though I tried to find an explanation as to why the stats are so different, all that I could really find online is people claiming that some of the players are most likely abusing specific hacks for the PlayStation Vita version of the game. So please keep in mind that for this video, we will refer to the stats from PSN Profiles, which, ironically, are most likely much more accurate than the ones you find on PlayStation Network. So with all of that out of the way, friends, grab your shovels and make sure you don't miss even a single beat, as we take a deep dive into the Crypt of the NecroDancer and figure out what it is that makes this game so incredibly hard to beat. Let's jump right in. Depending on the type of video games you're used to, looking at the bright colors and fast gameplay you can see on the screen right now can definitely be quite confusing. So to break it down a bit, let's start by saying that Crypt of the NecroDancer is first and foremost a roguelike, a type of video game that is defined by its ever-changing elements, which means that the enemies, items, and even the level layouts you come across during your playthrough are uniquely generated. So if you die or complete a run and then start anew, it is very likely that you will now meet completely different constellations of the aforementioned elements that are nothing like the scenarios you faced in your previous run. On top of this very unique kind of setup, the title adds one more component to the mix, which adds a gigantic layer of complexity to the game: rhythm. Because rhythm is arguably the most essential part of Crypt of the NecroDancer. You see, not only does the rhythm justify the game's odd title, but it also influences every single element of the gameplay. Things like your interactions with the environment, attacking enemies, and even the very ability to move your character will only be possible once those 2 bars meet in the middle of the screen, which immediately sets a very essential rule for the game and will probably take you quite a while to get used to, especially since entering deeper levels of the dungeons automatically mean music changes, and consequently set a whole new beat that you need to stay on. Next to tying all the aforementioned aspects to the beat, Crypt of the NecroDancer takes it one step further and, depending on the character you play, will punish you in different ways for missing a beat. For example, Cadence, the character you start with, will be punished by losing her gold multiplier if you ever mess up your timing, making it much harder to afford valuable items that the merchant sells. And while that is pretty annoying, it is still relatively harmless if you compare it to Arya, another character who will straight up just die if your timing is off and you miss even a single beat. In addition to that, enemies and their movement and attacks respectively are tied to the rhythm as well. The skeleton, for example, a common enemy you will meet quite often, will always follow the same pattern. Namely, it will take a step towards you, then raise its arms up, and then end the pattern with the attack itself. Pretty much all the enemies you meet throughout your runs are unique and have their own patterns. No matter if it's a wight who can phase through walls while chasing you, or the monkey who latches onto your character and stops you from moving until you break free. These different patterns may look relatively simple if you inspect them one by one, but it is really the combination of meeting a multitude of enemies in a small space while also having to keep track of their different behaviors, as well as doing your best to always stay on the beat, that makes things so extremely challenging. Considering that there's such a level of complexity in the game, it might not be surprising that it will take you quite a while to get used to these very unique gameplay features.
Before I nailed the basics, it probably took me a few weeks.
I was very on and off to begin with, so I think it took me around 3 to 4 months of just playing every now and then just to get the hang of it.
The silver lining here is that all you need to understand for now are only the most essential elements of the game. After all, we are still at a very superficial level, and all you should focus on for now is getting the hang of cadence, whereas the hundreds of hours that Santa and Wizolo invested go well beyond that, but more on that later. For now, let's assume that you've gotten familiar enough with the gameplay to beat the first few zones with cadence, which definitely will take you a few dozen hours, but on the other hand, will also earn you quite a chunk of trophies already. For instance, the game gives you a total of 4 silver trophies, 1 for each zone you manage to complete with cadence. A feat that is definitely possible for the average Joe to pull off if you're willing to show some dedication and willpower. On top of that, there are quite a lot of miscellaneous trophies that are definitely on the easier side as well. So realistically, you will definitely be able to earn some of those too. For example, there's a trophy for baiting the red dragon into killing another monster, one for taking out the merchant, one for having 10 health container at once, and even one for owning 6,000 gold coins. And while those trophies are definitely doable, they are already well within the ultra rare zone. So all in all, even if you're not the most skilled player, it is definitely possible to earn at least around 8 to 10 trophies out of the overall 28 achievements the base game has to offer. Which means that you will already sit at an overall completion rate that is far beyond the average of 4%. That, in and of itself, is pretty great, but at the same time, remember that all you have basically done so far is that you've beaten all the available levels of the game with the standard character once. And sadly, even though we are still at a very superficial level of Crypt of the NecroDancer, we have already hit rock bottom of the first layer. I know this sounds pretty bizarre, because at this rate, you have barely scratched the surface of Crypt of the NecroDancer and all it has to offer. But this is realistically as steep as the average player will go on their journey for the Platinum Trophy. Unless you are not willing to invest the hundreds of hours that our two pros mentioned and really want to get to understand the game for what it is, things end right here. And while that may seem disheartening, you've still done much more than the average player and have already proven quite a bit of skill. The best out of all of this is that you have managed to keep your sanity and actually had a good time while playing the game. A state that the poor souls who go beyond this point most likely won't experience anymore. So, with the first layer explored and only a fraction of the challenges out of the way, let's dive even deeper and find out what expects the people who dare to go any lower than the surface level. Now that you've gotten the hang of the basics and can reliably beat levels with cadence, the standard character, the next step towards earning a full completion in Crypt of the NecroDancer is getting good enough to beat the All Zones mode. The All Zones mode requires that from the moment you set foot into the first level of Zone 1, you will have to push through all the way until the final boss without dying once. Surviving the All Zones mode with cadence for the first time is going to be a struggle, but the challenge gets infinitely harder when you realize that you need to beat this game mode with almost all the other playable characters too. You see, there are a total of 11 playable characters in the game, and while we won't talk about all of them in detail, I still think it's important that we have a closer look at some of them and their respective abilities, as each one of them introduces a completely different playstyle and will therefore force you to adjust your gameplay quite a lot. So for example, a strategy or pattern that you've discovered to reliably get to the lower floors of cadence will not work with a character like Doff, who, due to her unique flower weapon, can only confuse enemies instead of attacking them. In the same sense, strategies that you'll eventually learn to clear levels with Doff won't work with a character like Bolt, and so on. What is very important to remember here is that the estimated time it will take you to earn a Platinum Trophy is somewhere in the range of 900 hours. Meaning that it's basically a given that you will fail again and again while playing through the 4 zones with all the different characters. Even Wizolo and Santa, who would eventually complete the game, spent much more than just a handful of hours.
I think I had around 775 around the time I got the Platinum Trophy.
Like 620 I think it shows, but by the time I got the plat it was about 600, which apparently is really fast.
And what certainly doesn't help either is the fact that almost all the characters have monumental differences in their unique traits, their playstyle, and their overall impact on the game itself. For example, let's take a look at Eli, who, unlike most other characters, doesn't spawn with a weapon, and on top of that is also unable to pick one up. The only thing he can use to defend himself are bombs, which have a bit of a delay before they blow up. As you can imagine, the delayed explosions from the bombs in combination with the constant need to stay on the beat will once again heavily influence the entire dynamic of fights and can turn enemies you previously took care of with ease into actual problems. Next to him, there's the previously mentioned character Arya, who will immediately die if you miss a single beat with her, only has a single health point, and is also not allowed to change her weapons. So in her case, next to all the other enemies that normally give you hell, even the innocent types, like the monkeys that would normally do nothing but grab onto you and hold you in place, are now suddenly a run-ending threat. Now, I personally only played the game on a very superficial level, and I'm way too bad to get anywhere near the harder parts. So my immediate impression was that Arya would be the pinnacle of difficulty, because surely nothing could be quite harder than having to stay on the beat flawlessly for the entirety of all zones, while also avoiding your enemies and having to plan your own attacks. Right? Well, not quite.
The worst is probably Monk, because he starts with 2 hearts, he starts with a blood shovel. Obviously you can't pick coins. You need to really plan out where you want to kill the enemies.
Monk is literally the worst. I hate him.
Monk's unique gimmick is that if he happens to touch any gold whatsoever, he will immediately die. At first, this may sound quite harmless when compared to Arya, but in practice, you will often run into situations where you will have to strategically plan where you will take down which enemy, as a single pile of gold that you can't avoid is now suddenly a death sentence for your run. Especially in big rooms that are stuffed with monsters, it is essential that you go in with a game plan and use your shovel as efficiently as you can to ensure you have a way out after all the combat is done. So to put it simply, when playing as Monk, the game changes its dynamic to an even more unforgiving and complex one than with all the other characters, turning the coins, which used to be a gameplay element you would normally always pick up, into a deadly trap. Now, if you do somehow find the extraordinary willpower and skill within yourself to actually beat the all zones mode with all the different characters, you will come to find that in exchange for your sanity, the game has rewarded you with yet another huge chunk of trophies. To be more specific, 1 for every character that you will unlock as you play through the all zones mode. On top of that, it is more than likely that in those hundreds of hours you spent hopping through dungeons, you will most likely also have earned the last few miscellaneous trophies that revolve around RNG. Not only will beating the all zones mode with the different characters get you a whole lot closer to full completion, but most of the trophies you will earn while doing so are genuinely extremely rare. Especially those that you've earned for completing the mode with the harder characters like Bolt and Arya are straight up much more rare than even most platinum trophies, and genuinely indicate that you've pulled off colossal feats. So with only a handful of trophies left, and after hundreds of hours you've now spent on sharpening your skills and talent, it may seem like you're just a few more hours away from finally completing the game. But let's not forget, this is still Crypt of the NecroDancer, meaning that the worst is yet to come. So with that said, let's move on to the final layer of the iceberg and find out what separates the people who have already shown incredible talent, patience and dedication from those select few who have gone the extra mile and earned the platinum trophy.
Give me that loot! Right.
Now that you're truly an expert and have basically mastered every single character in the game, it is time for you to face the Deathless mode. Rather than just asking you to beat all the zones in one go, the Deathless mode is basically an infinite loop, putting you right back at the beginning once you've beaten the final level of the last zone. So what the game wants you to do in this forever ongoing mode is getting 10 all zone clears in a row with cadence, which should take you around 3 to 4 hours at least without being able to save or exit the dungeons at any time, meaning that a single slip up could potentially void hours of progress and time you've spent.
Cadence actually has 2 unique bosses at the end, Dead Ringer and the NecroDancer. Those fights, like, you need to get really familiar with them because Dead Ringer's like 4 bells in the room and you have to destroy them bells and make him run into a gong. But if he hits you himself, he'll do massive damage and there's like all these other enemies in the room. And then NecroDancer afterwards, it's Cadence and Dorian. You have to move 2 characters at once and step on these buttons to like destroy the stage, pick up the golden loot. But as that's happening, there's all these other hard-hitting enemies and stuff. And I know my friend, he actually died on 9 wins in a row on the NecroDancer fight. He got killed by a red dragon like right before the end. So like you could just die anyway. Like if you don't get a good setup off the spawn, you can get hit once by like something hard. Like I don't know, just anything can go wrong. Like a red dragon can claw you once and you just die. You just need to like have like a very good knowledge of the game to like know what you want.
And in typical fashion, the game is still not done torturing you, even if you do somehow manage to beat this trophy as well, because there is still more to come. may I present to you the Polyamorous trophy that sits at 0.25% completion rate, requiring you to do an all chars run. What is an all chars run, you ask? Well, in essence, you basically just have to beat an all zones run again. This time, however, with every single character without a break, without dying with any of them, back to back. Considering that there are a total of 9 characters you need to do this with, you will have to be laser focused for roughly 5 entire hours. Any mistake, no matter how minor it may be, could once again set hours of progress back and will have you start over from the beginning once more. Safe to say, Polyamorous is a purely sadistic trophy and yet another test of your skill, patience and dedication, as you're bound to fail again and again before you can finally beat the last zone with your final character. The only ever so slightly positive thing here is that you're free to choose the order of the characters, so a common strategy is to get the hardest characters like Monk and Arya out of the way first, as you have a much higher chance of dying while playing as one of them. Picking them early on ensures that you will either beat the run and move on to the easier characters right after, or on the other hand will at least only lose 1 or 2 hours, rather than many more hours that it will take you to get to the final stage of your last character. If you somehow manage to pull through and complete this seemingly impossible feat, you won't just be greeted with a nice and shiny golden trophy, but will also come to realize that you've just unlocked yet another playable character. And though it may seem weird that the game has you beat an all zones run back to back with every single character just to introduce yet another character, it all makes sense when we take a closer look at the monster you've just unlocked. The character I'm talking about is, of course, none other than Coda. You know how in a lot of horror movies or ghost stories, the ultimate evil is often kept behind near unbreakable seals or mythical spells? Think of Coda as that exact evil. Not only was the condition to finally unseal him that you made it through inhuman challenges, but now that you've unlocked him, things get even worse. Because, unlike the other characters, Coda doesn't just come with one annoying quirk that makes the run a bit more complicated or tedious. Instead, Coda is the culmination of everything bad and bothersome the game has to offer. What that means in practice is that Coda inherited the traits of Arya, Monk, and Bolt, which in other words means that you can't touch any gold without dying thanks to the Monk's trait, can't miss a single beat without dying thanks to Arya's trait, and on top of everything have to make it through every single dungeon with the beat playing at twice the speed it normally would, thanks to Bolt's trait. So considering that Coda just made all the other characters we previously considered to be extremely tough to play as look like an absolute joke, you can probably imagine what is about to come now.
Coda, like, you can't hesitate. If you hesitate, you miss a beat, you die. Like, you have to restart again.
To earn the fittingly named Impossible, right? trophy, you have to beat an all zones run with Coda, meaning that you've got to beat all the zones back to back without missing a single sped up beat, while also avoiding to touch any gold, and due to Coda's low health, also can afford to get hit even a single time without instantly dying. So to say that you would have to play perfectly to earn this achievement is almost an understatement. Now, while every challenge up to this point was definitely incredibly challenging and hard, Coda is just on a whole other level. It is so bad in fact that a rumor spread which says you can only make it through the game with him while playing on keyboard, and that a normal controller won't be enough to do the job. But luckily, Wizolo and Santa both confirmed that they pulled this insane feat off with just a regular controller. And if you're curious as to how they felt when they finally managed to pop the Impossible, right trophy, well, let me just show you what they told me.
I genuinely cried when I got it, if I'm being honest. I didn't react in the conventional sense. I just took a seat back in my chair, just took a deep breath, and I just began to cry. I was just like, it's finally over.
I actually cried when I freaking beat Coda. I'm pretty sure SlimSanta did as well. Like, he told me he cried when he beat Coda.
So, after looking at what might just be the most horrible playable character to ever be put in any video game, there is just one last trophy, one last milestone that separates us from the Platinum Trophy now. And that last hurdle is not necessarily just difficult, but on top of that, extremely draining and tedious. All that is missing now to finally complete Crypt of the NecroDancer is that you master the low percent mode. Similar to how the Polyamorous trophy did, the ultra rare lowest of the low trophy with a completion rate of 0.07% is basically just adding yet another layer of difficulty to a previously existing mode that was already difficult. In Crypt of the NecroDancer, low percent means that you have to finish an entire run without picking up any items or interacting with the shrines. What that means is that you can't use weapons that are not part of your starting equipment, and also can't use anything to heal yourself, meaning that you basically need to beat the game with the exact equipment and conditions that you started the first floor with. And rather than asking you to do all of this with just a single character, Lowest of the Low wants you to pull off an all characters run with these conditions applied. So once again, you have to force yourself to play through every zone and finish the game with every character back to back, but with yet another set of extra conditions and hurdles applied. So to say that this trophy will absolutely destroy you is simply just an understatement.
Became less of an enjoyable experience and more of, serious business. And that was easily the hardest trophy in the game for me, just because it's so demoralizing getting 90 minutes to 2 hours into a run only to die to something really trivial. And yeah, it's just very hard to keep going after that.
Low percent, it's just so boring. Like most of the best strategy for low percent is killing the mini boss, then waiting the song out so that you would just go to the next floor, playing that over and over and over and over and over again, starting with like these really hard characters. It just got so boring to me. Like I was trying for a few months. It's so draining.
It took me 6 months to clear all characters low percent, and yeah, I think by the end of it, I think I died on the last character 3 times.
That trophy is like the most frustrating thing in the world. Like it's hard to actually force yourself to do it, especially if you just die like really far in. It's so demotivating. It can really get to you, to be honest.
Considering that you'll have to show inhuman patience and tenacity, need to memorize hundreds of different patterns, have to approach every single new character you pick up with a completely different mindset and strategy, and will often be asked to stay focused for hours on end just to eventually die right before the finish line, it makes a lot of sense that Crypt of the NecroDancer has such an incredibly low completion rate. Not to mention that the game seems to have purposely been designed in a way that just keeps adding layer upon layer of new difficulties and struggles on top of each other. Not only will you have to become extremely skilled to even beat the game as Monk or Arya, but the game will ask you to do an all characters run right afterwards. Not only will you have to be focused for hours on end in that all characters run, but the game will then confront you with Coda. And if you still haven't given up yet, then you will need to do an all chars run yet again, but with yet another handful of very tricky conditions applied. So to put it short, Crypt of the NecroDancer is a ludicrously difficult game, which explains why what might be one of the rarest trophies of all time is reserved for only the absolute best of the best. The 19 people who showed nerves of steel, kept their cool and pushed through, where more than 28,000 people before them have failed. So with all of that said, and especially if we take the numbers and stats into consideration, it is very safe to assume that not a lot more people will ever earn this platinum trophy. But before you lose all hope, just listen to what our 2 pros have to say.
I get a lot of people approaching me, and I always just tell them the same thing. I think anybody can just platinum anything with enough time and effort. It's not really out of the realm of possibility for anybody. I think a lot of people don't really see what they're really capable of.
You just need to be patient, honestly. It's a hard game and it takes a lot of learning. Like it's just repeating the same thing over and over again until you get used to how the enemies move, feeling comfortable with each character, and then you'll be set. Like it's definitely a scary platinum to like look into, but it's like a fun game as well. Like I know if people have seen it and they're like playing this game over and over again, like it looks so dead, looks so boring, but like there's so much in depth to it that like it eventually becomes fun until you get to low percent, of course. But I think you should definitely go for it. Like I'll give it a shot and just see how it is. Like it's definitely a fun game to go for.
Whether you seriously try to go for the platinum trophy in Crypt of the NecroDancer or decide to end your playthrough right after your first few dungeons of Cadence, it is an incredibly unique game that you're almost bound to have fun with and should definitely try out. And while, at least statistically speaking, you are most likely never going to be able to earn a platinum trophy, there is really nothing that speaks against enjoying some time in the colorful but very deadly dungeons of Crypt of the NecroDancer. Friends, we've once again made it to the end of the video. A huge thanks to SlimSanta as well as Wizolo, who have not only taken time out of their day to talk to me about their experiences with Crypt of the NecroDancer, but have also been kind enough to let me use their gameplay footage, which you've been seeing from most of the video, and are generally just awesome people. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a subscription, and please feel free to check out the other content on my channel. Most importantly though, and as always friends, thank you so much for spending your precious time by watching my video. It really means the world to me. See you in the next video friends. Be well and take care.